Welcome back to the Wargamers Guide to D&D. I'm Laura, the Blushing Noise Marine, and in this second episode, we're going to be getting into some random encounters and how to add a little bit of spice, how to add a little nuance to those. I've got a few ideas for you today, so I hope you check them out. As always, if you're enjoying what I'm doing, I hope you'll subscribe, and with that, let's get into it. So we set our scene. The party has come to a rest in the forest. They've decided to camp out for the evening. The area is dark. The fire has gone down. You could start this with some role-playing if they'd like to, if they want to chat about their day, but realistically, depending on what point of the campaign this is in, that's really up to you and the people at your table. But the main point is that they're coming to a halt in the forest. There's maybe a road nearby, but they've come in a bit. It's pretty dark. You can see that it's hard to see outside, and there's trees around, and there might be a little bit of moonlight, but beyond that, there's not a lot to help guide you. So as we're looking at this space, there's tons of different ideas. The nice thing about a forest is that it is both open and closed off. There is places for things to hide, and it's very easy to sneak up on a party in this situation. Even if there's somebody out on watch, they can't see that far between the trees and the shrubs and the bushes. Sight becomes an issue after even 30 feet. And because of the darkness and the looming trees around, we're assuming this is an old growth forest. The trees are large and creaky, and even the gentle breeze that goes through almost makes you feel more uncomfortable, not a silent companion alongside you. The embers of the fire have grown dim. In this scenario, we've got the ranger up. I've put the ranger there to kind of give the highest likelihood of someone who can maybe track down anyone who shows up. So trying to give the party the best chance. The other three members of the party are obviously asleep right now. They're in their tents. So for our purposes, that also means if anything happens, they're not in their armor. Now, for a barbarian, even a warlock, probably doesn't matter that much, but for a cleric, that can be a major hurdle to their survivability. For this purpose, we're going to assume the ranger is still wearing armor if they wear it. So, we're in the forest. It's very quiet. What's the most obvious thing? Of course, orcs show up. Orcs are always out and about, doing things. But how do we make this a little bit more interesting? There's a few ways we can somewhat do that. So I always like to give a player a chance to see what's going to happen, to give them a chance to react. Now, in these scenarios, I'm going to assume that they didn't see the orcs. The orcs are trying to sneak. They are looking to get the advantage on the party. They might not even necessarily realize they're adventurers. If they're lower level, they're not necessarily going to look particularly empowered. A ranger sitting by a fire just kind of looks like somebody wearing a cloak typically. So they could be even perceiving them as merchants. They might not necessarily be ramping up for a fight against noble adventurers or powerful enemies. These might just be some orcs that see an easy target, and they're going to take advantage of what happens. So, rather than just running everyone in immediately, we brought some goblins along with us. The goblins go in, they cause chaos, they run in, they light the tents on fire, and suddenly, there's a little bit more light, but things like dark vision stop working because there is a light source nearby. There is chaos. The player characters need to get out of the tents, so there's also the concern of what possessions they might have in those tents. So you've added some conflicting priorities by just throwing in 4 goblins. Now, those goblins are very likely going to die quickly, and then combat will start, and realistically, depending on how difficult you want to set this up, and you can kind of fine-tune the difficulty. You can make your orcs more specialized. You can kind of oomph them up a little bit. Maybe instead of a shaman, you bring along an ogre, or maybe even a hill giant, something that can add a little bit more complexity, a little bit more oomph to it. But again, that's just you DMing. So the next option is that they attack from the shadows. So rather than necessarily causing chaos immediately, they just go in, they send the goblins in first, and then the orcs move up ahead. Puts them within striking distance so that they can quickly engage the party in melee if they'd like to. But the presumption is sort of, in the first scenario, the goblins are causing chaos, but the orcs aren't necessarily revealing themselves. This allows you to kind of draw out the combat. So if you don't necessarily want it to be a deadly combat, but you just want there to be some nuance to it, you put the orcs in a few at a time. You hint that there's maybe a bigger threat out there. Do they want to use their spell slots right away? They're in the middle of a rest. They might not have their spell slots refreshed yet. If they're even a higher level party that has used all of their once a day abilities and spell slots, and they're maybe a little bit diminished at this point. So you can throw some targets at them and kind of make them make some choices early on, and then the bigger threats come out. So in this idea, though, the attacking from the shadows is the goblins are going to go in, they're going to engage them in melee, and the orcs are going to start using ranged weapons. So you're going to have that immediate damage is happening. The orcs are out for blood. They want the party dead. Maybe they know why. Maybe the party has been attacking orcs a lot recently. They've been hunted down. You can find the narrative that fits, but these are orcs that want blood. So they're moving up, they're staying in the shadows, but because the party's illuminated from the fire and the burning tents, they're easy prey. The shots are going off. You can prioritize the shots. If you get some early initiative against the barbarian before they can rage, you can do some damage on them, really put the party on the back foot, and make them start questioning, how the cleric is going to interact. Does the cleric need to go into more of a healing stance? Does the ranger need to worry about healing now? Is the warlock focused solely on damage, or is there a utility that they need to be focused on? The more questions and options you give your players, the more intricate a combat you're going to have, which is just better for everyone, honestly. So the other option, obviously, the orc warband just charges in. Very orky. I'm a big fan of smarter orcs, though, but it's a classic. Makes everyone happy. Feels good to have those sometimes where the party just gets to go at it and they get caught on the back foot and they have the heroic moment. This can be more so to almost entice your players in. So if you're finding that they're just kind of wandering around, maybe they're looking for a dungeon and they haven't been able to find it, or it's been a lot of kind of trudging about, and you haven't really had a lot of dice rolling, and you kind of need to get them back on track, a little bit engaged and excited, because again, this can lead to, okay, now we're going to track the orcs back. Maybe they'll have more information. Maybe we take a hostage and interrogate them. There's different things that can come out of this. So you're really just trying to break up. Action combat is meant to break up the role playing around you. It also gives your party something to talk about. It can help push the story forward. So this might not necessarily be the most nuanced example, but that might not be why you're using it. So you throw them in, you have the fight happen, and the party feels great. They feel engaged. They, now have a new outlet for the story to follow. There's a lot of really fun things that can happen out of this, and realistically, all you did was some orcs at them. It's not super complicated, but again, you can make it a little bit more complicated, focusing on the cleric, tying up the barbarian with some chaff. In a lot of these examples, you'll notice the goblins are missing. The kind of assumption is while the orcs are running in, the party is going to clean up those goblins. So there's nothing worse for the party than having all of their ranged classes locked in combat and not able to, say, shoot out as easily or cast spells, so they have to kind of deal with those goblins. Is why it's sort of nice to have those little chaff things, because you have to deal with them. You have to focus on them, or else you're impeding your abilities. So The key to combat is not necessarily throwing the biggest thing at someone or the biggest thing they can handle. It's limiting options, which then forces people to be more creative. So there's a few different ways to do that. Another option on the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe you've had a lot of combat recently, and sometimes people forget that random encounters don't have to be negative. I mean, you can easily turn this one into a -1. Say they get mad and start fighting the merchants. Like, it can turn into a combat. Anything can. But if they've been traveling for a while and supplies are getting low, this is a nice, easy way to not force your party to have to go find a town. So they're along the road, and another set of merchants comes down on the opposite side. They end up deciding to stay together for the evening for safety. They're sitting around the fire telling stories. If you want to, bring in some anecdotes to help steer the party in the right direction, maybe some rumors, maybe some information that'll help them along the way. Maybe these merchants know information that the party doesn't because they're coming from the direction the party's heading in. So again, not necessarily about combat, but sets the stage, helps move the party along, gives them some important information, and again, just adds a little bit of flavor to what would otherwise just be, all right, we rest for the night. What happens? It doesn't always have to be negative. It can be positive. And stock up. Maybe they even have a magic item that they're willing to part with because they're so excited that they have new friends along the road. Who knows? Is that magic item even real? Also, who knows? So have fun with it. This one, I kind of like the idea of. This one is really, will test your improv chops. You have a wanderer show up in camp. So party's resting. Maybe not, they're all in bed except for the ranger in the situation. Wanderer shows up in the camp. How do they deal with it? How loud are they? Who else wakes up? What are they looking for? How does your party deal with strangers? Who is this wanderer? Are they a powerful wizard? Are they just some guy? Are they on a long quest? Are they from this realm? This can go in any direction you possibly want it to. The one I'm going to point out in a second is maybe a little cliche, but I sometimes like a little bit of cliche because it's a classic for a reason. But this is a fun little way to add a little bit of role-playing in. The wanderer can ask questions and maybe help even refine the characters in the party. If you as the DM are feeling like you don't quite understand somebody's character enough, this wanderer can be a great tool to unearth that, ask questions, rather than you as the DM saying like, hey, Tim, who is your character like? What's their backstory? The wanderer can come in and help enlighten the folks at the table and get some ideas spinning for maybe some other stories, and really just, instead of going from just talking it through as people at the table, bring it into the story, bring it in, give it some life, give it some breath. And you also then get to hear how they perceive their character story and how the character perceives themselves, which is far more interesting and far more useful than a written out backstory is ever going to be. So the Wanderer can be a lot of fun. And you know what? Maybe sometimes the Wanderer's a dragon, because that's also fun. The reason why I say it's a hostile dragon, in this case, either the party is maybe more powerful, and you can have this happen after they've talked, they've gotten to know them, and the Wanderer was always waiting to attack the party. They just wanted to get more information. Maybe they think the party's up to some grander scheme and they're trying to figure out what's going on. So you can add in that kind of like, ooh, maybe the Wanderer is part of something bigger. However it fits into your story. It's a fun way to add some nuance, and then obviously the party now has to deal with a hostile dragon. So again, it shouldn't be some ancient dragon you're in the middle of the woods. That's not a great way to have a final boss fight, but a young adult dragon that's trying to prove themselves and, find out some information, maybe gets themselves ahead of some scheme that they've been working on for 30 years. There's a lot of different ways that this dragon can be looking to benefit themselves and taking advantage of the party. Now, the reason I also bring the dragon is I want to talk about flying. I feel like flying is underutilized. Flying adds so much complexity to your combats, and it really, if you use it right, it can make combat more difficult without necessarily making it just your enemies all needing to be tougher. Because realistically, if we look at our party lineup here, barbarians are typically melee. The ranger is not, the warlock is not, and the cleric may or may not be. So the dragon adds the complexity of flight and also having, dragon's breath. Maybe this forest ends up getting set on fire because of if it's a red dragon, as an example. So we're somewhat limiting the ability of the barbarian to just go absolutely ham unless they can figure out how to attack the dragon. So dragons can continuously fly. They can just stay up above. You might bring them down, you might swoop them down, and this is also a great way of teaching your party about readying actions. Because realistically, the dragon is also most effective in melee. So the dragon does need to get close, but it does not have to stay close. So readying an action from the barbarian, making sure that they're in the way, maybe they're ready to grapple on and climb onto the dragon and start attacking them from the back. It just forces your party to start thinking more tactically. And because it's a random encounter, it's not necessarily tied to some story event. So again, this doesn't have to be tuned up to the nines. You don't have to have the absolute strongest dragon that you think the party can kill. It's more about using the dragon as a tutorial in flying combat. It can also get the party thinking about the need for flight and having access to it. Even as something as simple as, I'm going to throw a grappling hook as the dragon flies by to try and get on there, and then I'm going to climb onto its back. That's a thought that if a party's never dealt with a flying enemy, they're not going to. So if you're having any type of a campaign that is going to involve flying enemies in the future, this type of random encounter can be a way for them to trial and error their way through. And again, you don't have to necessarily put them in a lot of danger. There's always danger with combat, but they don't have to be in a ton of danger. And again, they're just going to have to figure their way through it without necessarily having a ton of consequences. This one is a bit of an interesting idea, and it really depends on where you are in the campaign. If you're looking for a bit of a break, if you feel like the party's been absolutely at the main story, or they've been on this quest for so long and they just need a break, the missing party member. Did the ranger fall asleep magically? We don't know yet. Where's the barbarian at? Are there any tracks on the ground? Can we even tell what's going on? Did the enemies use magical means to cover their tracks? How are you going to uncover that? Turn it into, it's almost like a murder mystery, but the player character isn't actually murdered. So it forces the party to have to track down the missing member. Now, you don't want to necessarily keep the party split for long periods of time. It doesn't become fun for the person who's playing the barbarian if their character is just off screen for long periods of time. But getting the party to think through, okay, how do we actually track down? You have a ranger. That's the thing that they're usually good at. You've got a cleric. They have spells that can be helpful. You have a warlock. They have spells that can be helpful. Can they think through their utility spells rather than just always focusing on combat spells? So again, it just is, again, a bit of a tutorial on like how do we deal with this non-combat situation, and it puts the party into a mindset where they need to have utility as well. So again, it's just educating the party a little bit. Maybe they're just in a nearby cave. The barbarian is being interrogated by some force that the party has been messing with. It doesn't have to be some like grand hostage situation. It can just be as simple as like, they put the ranger to sleep and stole the barbarian who was sleeping so soundly didn't even wake up. Then you have to do anything, and they've since been trying to get answers out of them as to what the party's up to. And again, your ability to improv is going to be dependent on what your experience is with it, but it doesn't have to be super convoluted. It can be a little bit contrived. The point is to get your party thinking outside of just like combat related situations, because they don't have a target. The key of this is that there isn't an immediate threat. They can't just solve this with fireballs. They might be able to solve it with fireballs soon, but they can't solve it with fireballs yet. And that's the key point. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us for the second episode of the Wargamers Guide to D&D. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you find these helpful, and I hope it's bringing more life and flavor to your games. If you'd like to hear more from me, you can check out the Chaos Divided 40k podcast, where we talk about Warhammer 40k. Obviously, that's where the wargaming side of this comes from, and you can find me on Instagram at Blushing Noise Marine. And until next time, bye-bye.